So we're going to start our section on Kingdom Animalia, and eventually we're going to work our way through the 9 different phyla making up this kingdom. Before we can get to that, however, there are a few basic things right off the bat that you guys need to know about animals. First of all, animals are multicellular, and they're heterotrophic eukaryotes with tissues that develop from embryonic layers. And these pictures should give you an idea of how diverse this kingdom can be. So now we already went over what the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic was. We did this in the past sections. But just to refresh your memory, the term eukaryotic applies to organisms whose cells contain complex structures enclosed within membranes. And as you can see from this animation, the cell has membrane-bound organelles, which we learned about while covering cell structure. So this should all be review for you. The term heterotroph should also be review for you. Autotrophs and heterotrophs, we covered this in our lecture on food webs and ecosystems, and this refers to the inability to produce food on their own. So animals consume either autotrophs, such as plants and algae that create chemical energy from the sun, or other heterotrophs. Doing this provides them with food, which can be converted into energy. And all animals are heterotrophs, which is something that I want to stress to you guys. No animals are autotrophs. Tissues are formed from germ layers, and the ectoderm, meaning the outside layer, and the endoderm, the inside layer, and there's also the layer in between, the mesoderm. However, not all animals have a mesoderm. When an animal only has an endo and an ectoderm, then this animal is defined as being diploblastic. That's something you guys are going to need to remember. Animals with a mesoderm, as well as an endo and an ectoderm, are known as being triploblastic. So we here have a picture showing the process of cellular division of an embryo in the early stages. We start with a zygote, which cleaves, and each time the cell cleaves, we end up with 2 new cells, where 1 was previously. We'll start with 1, then 2, then 4, then 8, and so on and so forth. Here we see the 8-cell stage, and then finally we can begin to see a ball of cells called a blastula. And this animation that I'm about to show you is the process of cell division creating a blastula. Looking at the cross-section, we can see the cavity in the blastula called the blastocoil. And now finally we can see gastrulation, where the opening in the cell will start forming. From this opening, one of 2 things can happen. Animals can either have protostome or deuterostome development. If the blastopore, the opening, develops into a mouth first and then continues into forming the anus of the animal, then the organism would be considered to have protostome development. This is very important for you guys to learn for class, so make sure you have this down. If the anus forms first, however, and the mouth second, then the organism is known to have deuterostome development. This is like animals like us. Humans have deuterostome development. I'm going to show you guys a video now of a real blastula forming as the cell divides. So protostome development usually involves what is known as spiral cleavage, which by looking at the picture you can see the way that the cells are forming around the blastula. They're spiraling around and there's some overlapping going on. When we compare this with radial cleavage, which is characteristic of deuterostome development, we can see that there isn't really any overlap, that the cells are perfectly situated right next to each other and on top of each other. Don't worry about boxes 3 and 4 in the illustration. We're not going to worry about that. When it comes to body plans, there are 3 different types of body cavities. First, animals that possess a column, which is a fluid-filled cavity within the mesoderm. These are considered to be colomates. This means that these organisms have a true cavity where their internal organs are lined by the mesoderm on both sides, suspending their internal organs. Pseudocolomates have somewhat of a column, but it's called a false column. They still have a cavity, but it's not considered a true column. So here we see the column is either lost or reduced in size in the animal. A pseudocolumn is lined on one side by the mesoderm and on the other side lined by the endoderm. So this is the difference between colomates with a true column and pseudocolomates with a false column. Acolmates have no colon. There's no fluid-filled cavity. Animals are also defined by their symmetry or by their lack of symmetry. They can be labeled as either asymmetrical, radially symmetrical, or bilaterally symmetrical. Here we see a sea urchin, which has radial symmetry on the top of this illustration. And no matter which way you cut through it, no matter how many times you cut through it and divide it, like you would a pie, the sides are always the same. When you compare this with bilateral symmetry, humans have bilateral symmetry, just like this crustacean. If you divide it down the center, each side is going to be the mirror image of the other. But you can't divide it any other ways. You can't, once again, cut it in half and expect the sides to look the same. So that's the difference between radial symmetry and bilateral symmetry. Now, animals can either have sexual or asexual reproduction. We might think that's kind of strange to consider that animals can have asexual reproduction just like plants can, but it is possible. There are certain species and certain phylums that purely reproduce via asexual reproduction. So now that you have a little bit of an overview of the basics about animals, we're going to go over animal phylum, but for right now, this is as much information as I'm going to give you as what's on this slide, because tomorrow when you come to class, we're going to have an in-class activity. We're going to divide into groups, we're going to look at the specimen jars, and we're going to see real-life examples of the different types of animals that can be that are in animal phylums. So for right now, there are 9 main animal phylum that I want you guys to learn about. For right now, just learn this list, and we'll talk about it more tomorrow. And make sure that you have all the stuff that we talked about before about deuterostome versus protostome development, blastulas, all that stuff. Have that ready for tomorrow because we're going to talk about it a lot.